Hello and welcome to the Bowling University studio from the International Bowling Campus in Arlington, Texas. I'm John Karabatsis and I'll be your host for this episode. Thanks for joining us. If you're joining the Profit Break for the first time, welcome. We're glad you're here. Just give us 15 minutes and you'll be on your way to improving profitability. We all know how critical the beverage segment is to guest satisfaction and overall profitability. The days of building it, and they will come, are over, so just how do you grow the beverage business? Our guest today, Kurt Moody, is well versed in providing solutions to this very question and will be leading an educational session, Tips to Get More Bang from Your Bar at Bowl Expo in Orlando. Kurt is the Director of Beverage Operations and Training with Patrick Henry Creative Promotions, where he implements new beverage strategies and develops beverage leaders throughout the country. Today he's joining us to share a sneak peek of his upcoming Bowl Expo session. Kurt, it's great to see you again. Thanks for joining us.
Absolutely. Very happy to be here.
Yeah, thank you so much. So, hey, let's talk a little bit about your upcoming session, okay? So it's about bar, it's about the beverage business, about getting bigger bang. So who should come to this?
Well, I really think it's beneficial for any owner-operator, people who run our centers, but at the same time, any key beverage decision maker. That could be your general manager, it could be a restaurant manager or bar manager, anybody who can take away the valuable insights on trends and reading the guests, but also how to implement this beverage program with associates and staff.
Okay, so a well spent 75 minutes of time, I would think. So let's dive right into it. Last time you were here, and in your previous sessions you've done with us, you talk a lot about data and using data to drive your decisions, and not gut, but
Correct.
Using actual data to drive your decisions. So, and that includes reading those POS reports and so on. What's the best way to use that data moving on? How do we make sure that we're staying on trend for the upcoming year?
Well, I think it starts with a continual read of that data, not allowing one read of the data to be the whole year's worth of decisions. Plan for a reading of sales reports and a reading of competitor menus and trends, make a decision, and then it's a continuing reading those results, looking at 30 days, 60 days, 90 days, 120, to see what are the winners, what are the dogs, and where do I re-innovate or reprogram to really maximize that income.
Okay. So that you have to do it frequently, so that you know what your winners are, what your losers are, and then you move on. Now, in terms of trends, okay, I know at your session you're going to talk a little bit about trends. The non-alcohol space, the mocktails and zero-based spirits and so on, are taking a bigger share of the categories. How can our centers determine whether this is an area that they should play in?
Well, it is a very big trend towards 21, 22, and into 23, and it starts with zero proof or liquor-free libations, but we have to understand that the sober curious movement is still less than 2% of overall sales. So even if you had the most amazing zero proofs menu category and double it, you're still less than 5% of sales. Okay. So we have to tread lightly in that area. Allow the other places in the industry to be those early adapters, and let us be kind of a little, not late to the party, but let them flush out what works and what doesn't work. It definitely pertains to what we would call a veto vote. If you and your family or group of friends are looking at a family entertainment center to go to have a great time on a weekday night or a weekend, is one person who is that non-alcohol lifestyle going to veto going to a place because they don't have an offering for them. So that menu category within our centers is probably a very small category,
okay.
But it needs to have one or two representations on the menu. Something
they need to explore. Well, actually, and that's a good segue to my next question, because over the last couple of years, what's happened with the pandemic is centers have reduced their offerings, right? It's hard getting staff, so they've reduced their menu, not just in the bar, but in the food area as well, for those reasons. So do you think, is that a trend that you see continuing, those reduced levels, or is looking at the zero-based alcohol and innovations, is that going to start to build up those menus again?
Kind of two-part. One, I think it's going to determine on what we see in our guests returning to our centers, or continuing to return to our centers. It's one of those where 2022 was kind of a return to, dare I say, normal, but we don't know what 2023. We have an economy that has lessened some people's pockets and freedom of money and leisure money, but at the same time, they're now returning in full force out into the restaurant industry. So I don't think it's a full return of every menu. I think a lot of centers and bars and restaurants figured out how to run smarter with less inventory items, less menu items, and less recipes for a limited staff to execute. And they found out how to be more profitable in that space. So I don't see large menus returning. I do see seasonal menus returning, where they can kind of tread in those early innovation waters without having to completely change a menu or program.
Okay, something you kind of dip your toe into, see if it works, and then move on. So, which is a common question that most operators have. That I always say, well, what's enough? Okay, when you're talking about inventory, what's enough? How many different brands of spirits should I have? How many draft beers should I have? How many bottled beers should I have? Is there a secret recipe in the industry that would help me determine what's the right amount?
Well, the first thing we want to look at is, what is your brand story? If your brand story is all about craft beer and having the most draft lines and having the most ice-cold beer in your town, then you probably want to over-index when you have draft beers or bottled beers. Establishing how many menu offerings you have is really based upon, one, what you sell currently. Read, again, back to data. You read your sales reports, and you want to try to find out where that number is when you hit about 90 to 95% of your sales. It would be amazing to look at, because you look at something like draft beer, you can get 90 to 95% of your sales or guest saturation within about 8 to 10 draft lines. After you have more than 10 draft lines, your point of return in that guest saturation only impacts those last 4%. So it's not really income driving, it's story driven. But that can be big for a brand.
Okay, so it really depends on who you are and what you're trying to portray yourself as. Again, along those lines too, before the whole COVID thing hit, happy hours and limited time offers were very common. And during that time, in an effort to maintain profitability, a lot of the happy hours went away. Okay, so a question for you is kind of a two-parter. Do you see happy hours that coming back to where they were pre-pandemic? Is it time to start doing that? Do you see that coming back? And then how can centers execute those but still maintain their targeted cost of goods?
It's interesting, because outside of centers in the normal restaurant industry and casual dining and polished casual all the way up into fine dining, we see happy hours returning, but not the traditional happy hour that we once knew. It's happy hours where it's all day, everyday value. So you still might have a $5 drink or a $4 beer, a discounted bottle or glass of wine, but that's the everyday price. What the pandemic taught us is we don't have to discount to drive traffic. Pre-pandemic, you would treat discounting and happy hours as a traffic driver. Now we see it as a guest delight. They're choosing you because they give you quality of drink with value within the price. So happy hours returning, they still might call them happy hours, but the pricing isn't about a $1 well drink or a $2 draft beer anymore. Guests prefer a higher quality beverage at a everyday value.
Okay.
When it comes to our centers getting ahead of that, that's where you really want to rely on the data of what your competitors are doing. What in your market is stealing your guest? Is it the mom and pop dive bar around the corner? Is it the national casual dining chain that's in the parking lot with your center? Really establish what in your area has that all day, everyday value, or even a discounted happy hour, and find out a way to compete with that menu.
Gets back to your brand too, right? What's your brand all about, and what are you selling? Are you selling the experience? Excuse me, are you selling an experience, or are you selling on price? So
correct.
Good point. All right, we have time for one more question. You've always been a big proponent on the beverage experience is a direct reflection on the staff's competence and their ability to provide that experience. So how can the owners, the operators, increase their staff competence and confidence so that they can present the best possible foot forward for the brand?
Well, it really starts with training, and training is cascaded from the top down. So the first thing is getting your managers involved in the program implementation. It's having the managers understand every element of it, from the brand stories of the products you include to how to execute the recipes. The biggest thing in that is execution needs to be consistent, and with that comes training. It's training the recipes to the staff repeatedly until they become involuntary memorization. And then we're really good as an industry in making sure that food comes out of the kitchen to spec, but making sure that manager rotates around the bar to make sure that beers and wine and cocktails are going to our guests to spec as well.
Okay.
It's some training, but then continuing observation and accountability.
Good point. All good points. And you're going to dig a little bit deeper into all these topics at your upcoming session in Orlando, right?
Correct. Awesome. We'll expand on everything from how to read data, how to start your brand story with beverage, all the way through how to implement them and get the best results from your staff.
Great information. Thank you again, Kurt, for joining us. We love having you here. Just a knowledge of information for our staff and our staffs in each of the centers. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. So if you have a bar operation, you won't want to miss Kurt's Bowl Expo session, Tips to Get More Bang from Your Bar, on Tuesday, June 27th in Orlando, Florida. As we wrap up another edition of the Bowling University Profit Break, remember that when your focus is on growing people, people will grow your business. We look forward to seeing you next time for another great episode. If you have any questions about today's show or would like additional information, you can reach us anytime at education@bpaa.com. Also, all previous Profit Break episodes are available 24/7 for you and your team to watch at bowlinguniversity.net. Plus, new Profit Break episodes are available every month. So mark your calendar, watch your email, and join us on Facebook to hear about the latest episodes. Until then, I'm John Karabatsis, and do for one what you wish you could do for everyone. We'll see you next time. So long.